Hey everyone, Tactics here, and with the PTR build finally up and playable, I've been messing around a little bit with the Guardian Druid tier set, which does work a little bit differently than we expected given how it read, which I'll explain in this video. Also briefly be going over the first two bosses that were available for testing in the new Sepulcher of the first one's raid, Dosegni, I'm gonna say Dosegni, but no idea, Dosegni and Skolex. But for anyone interested in actual boss guide videos, I'll be putting those out closer to 9.2. These are just going to be much more brief, less details, just kind of going through how I felt about them. But let's start off actually with the tier. So a bunch of things we found out about how this tier works. First, the 4-piece, it does scale with crit, mastery, and versatility, not with haste, pretty much as expected based on how it read. So that's going to bump up those stats value a little bit relative to haste, of course, because this is actually going to be a pretty significant portion of our damage, anywhere from like 15 to, depending on the number of targets, like upwards of like 40% of our damage on very, very big target pulls. So it's a lot of damage. It's a lot of damage, and obviously any way you can amp that damage, crit, mastery, versatility is going to be valuable. I think that kind of combined with the 2-piece giving us more berserks, and of course we have that conduit giving berserk haste when it procs, or whenever you use it, sorry. So it's going to definitely reduce the value of haste a bit. Guardian Druid secondary stats are all relatively similar, and I think this might kind of shift the balance where you're going to want to get a small baseline of haste. I believe the numbers in the ballpark of 12% haste, which lets you fit in 4 thrashes in those berserk procs from the 2-piece. So when you pop your Barkskin, you get 4 seconds of berserk, and having 12% haste will let you thrash 4 times. So you want to get your haste to that level, and then outside of that, you don't really care about haste at all, really, because it's going to do obviously the amp your damage from your regular kit, all those kinds of things, but it's not going to interact with your 4-piece, which is a huge portion of your damage. And of course, all those other stats also have defensive and offensive value outside of amping the 4-piece. So I think you're going to want to kind of drop haste after that 12% threshold and focus on crit, mastery, and verse. But we'll have to see how everything works out. The 4-piece may get nerfed damage-wise, which honestly may be a little justified. It is pretty strong right now, but we'll have to wait and see how the rest of the PTR plays out. Continuing on with the 4-piece, the buff itself is actually not tied to Berserk, so the pulsing damage and healing is actually a completely separate buff, and it's a 12-second duration, no matter how you proc it, whether that's from the 2-piece, right? Popping your Barkskin will give you a 12-second duration buff of pulses instead of a 4-second as we previously thought it would give. Even when you proc it with Incarnation, which is a 30-second long buff, it's only, you get 12 seconds of these pulses only. So overall, honestly, I actually like this better than how we thought it would happen, because it takes a lot of the power away from Incarn and into these other moments where you need it more, realistically, right? It actually doesn't double down on the power of the Incarn window. Yes, it gives you that for initial 12 seconds of your Incarn window is going to have that buff, so it's going to be pretty powerful right off the bat. But realistically, you're going to be getting a lot more of the power in just your regular Barkskin windows, which I think is very, very good compared to how the set worked. Well, compared to how we thought the set would work, right? And honestly, it does overall give a higher uptime as well, because you're going to be using that Barkskin way more. I think though this does make Survival of the Fittest the go-to talent if it continues to work like this, even in Mythic Plus, just because you're going to be giving up so much damage if you don't take Survival of the Fittest for that CDR and Barkskin, because you're getting full 12-second duration pulses every time you proc, or every time you use Barkskin, rather. So it's going to be tough to give up despite how powerful Earth Warden is. In Mythic Plus, I think you're going to have to give it up for Survival of the Fittest, and you're just going to have to figure out how to live being slightly less durable. But honestly, the healing is nice from the 4-piece, but I think Earth Warden healing does provide more in a Mythic Plus setting, but it's not nothing. So you are gaining a little bit of durability, but it's not quite as much. But I think you're going to have to give it up given how much offensive value you gain. The 2-piece does proc Incarn if you are talented into Incarn. I know some people were unsure. Some people thought, well, it doesn't say it in the tooltip, which it doesn't, but it does proc Incarn, so you do get the HP benefit. when you're proccing Incarn from it via Barkskin as opposed to Berserk. So just to clarify that, it does proc Incarn. And it now causes Barkskin to obviously auto-shift you into bear form because Barkskin does proc Berserk or Incarn, and that forces you into bear form. So that's more of a small thing. It's not a bad thing, but it can take a little bit of getting used to for cat weaving, because you may actually be pressing Bark kind of on CD, get that extra damage, and just it'll yank you out of cat into bear form. So you just need to be aware of that. It's a little thing you need to just kind of be prepared for, a little adjustment to make. There's currently one major bug that I'm just worried about with the set, where the 2-piece 4-second proc of the Berserk or Incarn will overwrite an active Incarn or Berserk. So if you just popped Incarn for whatever reason, you also instantly pop Barkskin, your 30 seconds of Incarn are gone, you now have 4 seconds left. So that, obviously hoping that will just be fixed, ideally it'll add to the duration, right? So hopefully that's how they fix it. But I know a lot of other classes are having similar problems with buffs overwriting from the tier set. I think Rogues and Shadowblades are having a problem with that as well. So it's just a PTR problem. Hopefully it gets fixed before it goes live. Overall, though, after testing the set, very, very strong. Even just in 2-target cleave at 252 eye level, which was the rate testing, it was doing a substantial amount of damage. Like I was saying, depending on targets between like 15 and 40+% damage, it's a lot. It's I would not be surprised if it was nerfed a little bit, and justifiably so, to be completely honest. But we'll have to see what happens. Overall, though, very, very happy with the set. It's definitely a nice little change up for Guardian Druids, especially given how in the past we've had some pretty weak tier sets. Then we have raid bosses, Doseg, however you want to say that boss name, the Fallen Oracle. Call it the Fallen Oracle. She was first, and she's actually the second boss listed in the Dungeon Journal, and it was fairly simple, not too intensive mechanically, which makes a lot of sense given the position in the raid. Expected to be one of the easier bosses, but still very enjoyable. It had a shockwave type mechanic, reminiscent of Imperator back in High Maul, if you remember that, but obviously much easier to deal with. The boss kind of slowly corrupts these 4 pillars around the room. You start with 1 corrupted at the beginning of the fight, and every so often they'll erupt in a certain order, and you just have to make sure you don't cross through these shock waves within 6 seconds of each other, otherwise you die. Blinking or like lock gating and stuff like that, of course, lets you avoid the debuff from touching it, so you can kind of cross as many as you want if you need to do that. And there's also a soak, which shoots kind of 3 missiles that you need to have different people soak to split the damage, because if you soak it multiple times, you get a huge damage amp on it. Or you can just immune it, which we immuned several times over the course of this fight. So immunity is going to be pretty good here, but luckily this boss is fairly early in the raid, like I mentioned, so it's probably not going to be too difficult, so you're not going to have these mass immunity comps, most likely anyways. There's also an ad that spawns fairly often throughout the whole fight, and it just kind of constantly spawns these puddles, so you want to kill these ASAP so you don't run out of room. And then when the boss just runs out of mana, she'll just teleport to one of the pillars and start corrupting that one, and she'll just give herself a raid shield and do this massive raid damage hit as long as that shield is up. So you have to burst that shield down, and then you'll return to that initial phase and go back with another corrupted pillar. In general, just a really cool fight. I enjoyed, but it doesn't seem like it's going to be super difficult. Makes sense though. Then we've got Skolex, the Insatiable Ravener, big worm boy. This one's a little later in the Dungeon Journal. It's 6th, I believe. But based on mechanics, it's likely to be a throughput check boss. Sludge Fist, Guardian, that kind of boss. So the difficulty is going to be purely based on the tuning and how much damage and healing throughput your group can pump out. Boss is stationary himself. He's just a worm in the sand, and he does have a tank cleave. So the tanks need to be, I believe, within 10 yards of each other, and everyone else needs to be away, otherwise you'll get accidentally cleaved by the tanks. But at the same time, there's a tank buster combo, which are all frontal cones. So the tanks need to kind of separate and do this little dance and a taunt back and forth, because there's this Rift Maw cast and Rend cast, right? So Rift Maw is a big magic hit, and Rend puts a long bleed on you. So depending on where you get like a rend in a tank combo, for the next tank combo, you want to make sure the other tank gets the rends, because otherwise you can refresh your rends from the previous tank combo. And the Rift Maul, you just want to make sure if those go back to back, the tanks are always alternating, because that puts a much shorter debuff on you. But if you get hit by 2 back to back, you're basically going to be one shot by it. So tanks need to be kind of like, we had them like 90-degree spread almost, a little less than 90-degree, maybe like 75-degree spread, just so we weren't in each other's cones, but we weren't blasting the raid with the frontals either, which had everyone else stacked on the far end. In terms of what everyone else was doing, there is a random target cone the boss does, so they had to avoid that, and then just blue swirlies on the ground had to avoid as well. The boss also slowly applied the stacking dot to players throughout each phase, and also applied it to the 3 furthest players and anyone within 10 yards of them when the Tank Buster combo came out. So you have to have certain players, probably tankier ones or ones with immunity, something like that, take those extra stacks and kind of hold them for this phase, because the only way to actually cleanse those debuffs, get rid of your dot stacks, is to have your entire raid stacked together, and this causes the boss to kind of burrow, kill anyone near him, and then pop up where the raid is, dealing a bunch of damage, and removing all of your dot stack. So it's kind of going to be a balance of damage and healing here to kill this boss, because every time you do that, the boss gets a stacking 10% damage buff. So you want to kind of extend those phases as long as possible, not necessarily just bring a bunch of DPS and kind of pump them. I'm just worried a little bit about tuning in this case, because the most recent example we had of a fight like this is actually Guardian of the first ones in the current raid tier, and that did not end up very well tuning wise, because people just brought a ton of healers, because the DPS check was pretty much non-existent. So hopefully the enrage and then the boss health and damage, all that stuff is tuned in a way where you don't just bring a ton of healers, Holy Paladins, looking at you Holy Paladins, and just overheal the fight and have a DPS check that doesn't matter. Overall though, had a ton of fun in the raid testing. I'm excited to see how the rest of the bosses in Sepulchre turn out, and that's going to be it for this video. So be sure to leave a like and subscribe to keep up to date with all the 9.2 PTR changes, which I'll be covering as new builds are released. You can also always check me out on my Twitch channel at Tactics, where I'll stream all the PTR stuff, Mythic plus Tazavesh coming soon as well, High Mythic plus Keys, Mythic raiding, all from a Guardian Druid POV. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.